Hello there. Tonight, we walk slowly into a Roman evening and let the city guide us to the baths. The streets are easing toward dusk. Shop fronts fold their shutters. A fountain keeps its patient music. Ahead, the thermae breathe out a mild warmth that hangs in the air like a promise. We step through the gate with sandals that know stone, pass a little counter where a token changes hands, and find the quiet rhythm of people who do this every day, never in a hurry. Inside, everything is arranged to calm you. Benches wait in the changing room, smooth with use. An attendant folds a cloak and sets it in a niche with the care of someone who has done this for years. Voices drop to a low murmur that turns conversation into background weather. Olive oil waits in small flasks. The strigil's curve catches a thread of light. A warm room opens to a warmer one, and then to heat that arrives without surprise. Floors remember the fire beneath them. Pools hold steady surfaces that reflect lamps like small stars. We won't try to race the order of these rooms. We will take the bath as the Romans meant it to be taken, one stage preparing you for the next. A little exercise in the light, a trace of oil, the slow scrape that leaves skin clear, a seat on a warm bench, the first shy breath of steam, the deeper chamber where heat speaks gently, a splash from a cool basin that wakes and then releases you, the plunge that resets the day. Along the way, we will meet the people who keep all of this moving. The oiler, the furnace worker, the steward of water, and we will notice how a city the size of Rome sends clean water in and takes used water away without fuss. For now, let the echo soften, let the stone hold you up, and let the evening narrow to the sound of water doing exactly what it was asked to do. The walk begins while the sun is still an idea on the western wall, a slant of gold that makes dust look like a quiet festival. You move with the street rather than against it, past stalls that are closing their shutters in a practiced fold, past a water seller who sings a last line to his clay jars, past a boy who sweeps a threshold with more rhythm than effort. Ahead, a long facade of brick and marble draws your attention without asking for it. This is the thermae, the public bath, not a bath as a private tub, but a kind of gentle machine for turning afternoon into evening. The building exhales a mild warmth that you can feel even before you touch the door. It smells faintly of wet stone, olive oil, and clean smoke, and the smell settles the thoughts that came with you from the street. Lamps have been lit at measured intervals along the porch, and the light reads as polite rather than bright. Above, small windows are glazed with sheets of soapy mica that soften the sky into a silver promise. You are not late, and you are not early. You are exactly in the time the building was built to serve. You join a small flow of people at the entrance and learn a few things in the first breaths inside. There is a doorkeeper's table, and on the table a bowl of small tokens, each one a sliver of bone or clay stamped with a sign. A fee equal to a quadrans. A copper coin that does not brag, changes hands, and the token moves to your palm as simply as a nod. Hours are posted on a board and loosely kept. Men and women share the building, but not the same rooms at the same hour, and attendants nudge the pattern along without making a speech. Sandals are expected, the floors are warm and sometimes very warm, and bare feet learn that lesson quickly. Voices around you are a soft weather of the city. There is talk about the races, a price of fish, an uncle who has a cough that does not leave, a cat that discovered the courage to live in a bakery. The talk is not loud because the building makes loudness look like poor manners. You notice that no one rushes and no one dawdles. The door opens, and the crowd seems to fold you into its calm. The first room is the apodyterium, the changing hall, and it is a still lake of benches, pegs, and niches. The floor is laid in careful patterns. The walls hold paintings that have learned how to be decorative without asking for attention. An attendant called the capsarius watches bundles and belts with a professional affection that comes from long practice. He shows you a niche for your sandals and a peg for your cloak, and he does it with a small movement that says he has done this 1,000 times and will do it 1,000 more. If you have brought a small flask of oil, he nods. If you have not, he nods again, because the bath can lend you what you need. You place your things where he indicated and notice how the bench remembers 100 other people who also sat down with a small sigh. Theft is not unknown in this room. The warnings are in the architecture itself. Niches that can close, pegs that sit in a line watched by eyes that make a living from attention. You feel lighter by a cloak and a belt, and strangely, lighter by a day you did not realize you were still carrying. Before heat and water, the building suggests movement. You step out into the palaestra, the open court that gathers light even when the day is fading. The air is softer than the street air, as if the pillars themselves slow wind to a pace better suited for breathing. A few men work a gentle game of trigon, tossing a small ball in a triangle with the kind of exactness that does not exhaust anybody and somehow still warms the shoulders. A trainer, one eye on the players, one ear on the building, offers a pair of halteres, small weights for a few slow raises and bends that wake the body without demanding a contest. On the wall, a basin shows a bright line of water that never quite overflows, as if the aqueduct had learned patience inside these stones. If you do nothing at all here, that is also part of the plan. You can stand in the court and count your breath to 4, then to 4 again, and the paving stones will count with you. The day loosens its grip. Just inside, under a painted arch, a narrow bench waits by a shelf where flasks and tools sit in a tidy row. Oil first, then the scrape. The man who tends this corner is the unctor, the oiler, and his hands are the part of the bath most visitors remember without knowing they remember it. A thin stream of olive oil, plain or scented with a quiet note of myrtle, touches the skin and turns dust into something that can be persuaded to leave. The strigil, a curved metal blade, does not cut. It gathers. It passes along the arm and down the shoulder with a steady pressure that feels like a sentence that is ending well. The mixture of oil and fine grit, called strigmentum, curls away from the skin and is wiped aside. There is no soap and no foam. The culture of the bath does not need them. What you are left with is a surface that feels like a decision has been made on your behalf, and you agree with it. If you have been alive in a hurry lately, this small routine convinces your muscles to remember a different schedule. The next room is the tepidarium, and it is the bath's handshake. Warm, not hot. Benches in a gentle curve. A ceiling that gathers steam and returns it in a small conversation with the skin. The floor is warm because of fire miles away. Felt here only as a thought, has been taught to pass its heat through empty spaces under the tiles. That system, the hypocaust, is the quiet partner of every step you take in this building. In the tepidarium, you spend a few minutes learning the grammar of the bath. Sit, breathe, listen to the small echoes that never become sharp. Let the warmth promise more warmth. You have heard that the bath moves from warm to hot to very hot, then back to cool, and you begin to understand why the order matters. If you jump ahead, the body resists. If you follow the path the architects drew with their floors and walls, the body goes along like a friend who trusts your plan. Through a higher door, where a curtain hangs not to block the way, but to teach the air some manners, you glimpse the caldarium, the hot room. But the bath is polite and does not hurry you. There will be time for heat that speaks without words, time for a basin of cold water called the labrum to press a clean shock into the forehead, time for the dry heat chamber, the laconicum, where the breath feels like a warm stone and a bench becomes a bed that suggests you could stay forever. For now, the tepidarium is the room that allows all later rooms to feel like a kindness rather than a dare. You can feel why sandals matter when floors are taught by fire. You can feel why talk stays low when stone speaks. You realize that a stranger might fail at the bath not because the building is cruel, but because the order is gentle and requires obedience to stay gentle. The bath is nothing but a sequence, and the sequence is everything. You return for a moment to the changing room to fetch the small flask you left on the shelf, and in that short walk you notice how the building moves people without pushing them. A boy with a bundle for an older man waits by the wall. An attendant offers a towel to a person who did not know he needed one. The doorway opens and closes like a breath. The capsarius glances at your niche and then at your hand, not to scold, but to say with his eyes that he is still sharing responsibility with you for your small world of cloth and sandals. In another place, such attention might feel like a demand. Here it reads as a promise that you will walk out with what you walked in with, plus an amount of quiet that you did not carry through the gate. At the far side of the palaestra, beyond a row of columns that lead the eye as a sentence leads the mouth, there is a discreet passage that smells faintly of the real labor behind the calm. It goes toward the prefurnium, the furnace mouth, toward stacks of wood, and the men who feed fire with a schedule instead of a shout. You are not invited down that way today, but the knowledge that the heat is honest, that it comes from fuel and skill rather than a trick, travels back through the floor and into your bones. The bath is like the city that built it, thousands of small promises kept in order so that the end feels simple. Water in, water out. Warmth here, not there. Light that is bright enough to see by and dim enough to rest under. Everything that looks like ease is the face that discipline wears when it has been working for a very long time. As dusk gathers outside and the lamps inside lean a little more toward gold, you begin to understand the quiet claim in the title of this visit. A stranger might not last a day in a Roman bathhouse because a day here, properly done, is a series of small agreements with a building and with one's own body. The agreements are gentle, but they are still agreements. Do this first, then that. Sit before you sweat. Warm before you heat. Oil before you scrape. Rinse before you plunge. Listen before you speak. If you break the order, the bath will forgive you, but it will not reward you. If you follow the order, the bath will carry you forward as a river carries a leaf that knows how to float. So you sit once more in the tepidarium and let the room tell you what is next. The bench has learned your shape. The breath has learned your pace. Somewhere behind a wall, a fire is pushed and then quieted. Somewhere above your head, steam finds a painted figure and makes the color shine for a second and then fade. When you rise, it is not because of a command, but because the body offers a simple thought. Now, you step toward the hotter door with sandals that feel like they belong to you again, and the curtain moves aside as if it has been waiting for your hand all day. At the threshold, there is always a pause, not because anyone stops you, but because the building likes to set its pace on your feet. A doorkeeper sits behind a low table with a small bowl of change and a tray of tokens. The fee is a quadrans, the sort of copper that doesn't pretend to be important. It clicks against its brothers, and the doorkeeper places a tessera in your palm, a little bone or clay disc stamped with the bath's mark. It is not a ticket in the dramatic sense, only a reminder that the house knows you are here and means to look after you. On a board nearby, the hours are chalked in an unhurried hand. Women earlier, men later, children at their proper times, festivals shifting the pattern by custom more than by law. You note sandals mentioned twice. The floors are kind to leather, less kind to bare skin, and the house prefers to teach that lesson with writing rather than with blisters. Just inside, a thin ribbon of rules runs along the wall, more suggestion than command. Voices low, sandals on, oil used with care, no rushing between rooms, no sharp scraping near the pools, no boasting, no politics, no business oaths. The Romans have never lacked for rules, but the baths practice a gentler version, manners that let many bodies share the same warmth without turning it into a market or a forum. You will find that quiet is enforced by stone as much as by attendance. The architecture rounds sound and returns it to you softer than it left your mouth. The first lesson is to let your gait fall into step with the building. The second is to save cleverness for the street. In the apodyterium, the attendant called a capsarius watches over benches and pegs with a professional affection that does not quite become ownership. He shows you where to place your sandals, where to fold your cloak, where to hang the small bag that holds everything you thought you needed and now discover you can live without for an hour. Theft is not unknown. The proof is not in warning signs, but in the way niches close, in the line of pegs that sits under steady eyes, in the habit of wrapping rings and coins in a cloth and tucking them deep. If you are wise, you learn the faces of the men who mind the bundles and you let them learn yours. A nod here is worth more than a speech later. Now and then you will hear, in a corner of the city, a small cursed tablet dug from old drains where someone once appealed to a god about a missing cloak pin. It is easier to make friends with the capsarius. What you carry in is simple. A small flask of olive oil if you prefer your own scent. Otherwise, the bath will lend you something plain, perhaps with a breath of myrtle or rosemary that will not quarrel with the heat. A strigil is sometimes your own, sometimes borrowed. Metal that learned to persuade rather than to cut. A linen cloth if you like. The house has them, but a familiar weave makes some people feel better about the business of drying. Sandals that you do not mind, teaching the ways of warm tile. If you come with more than this, the bath will cure you of the habit by making you notice how little you miss anything once the first warm room begins its work. Etiquette inside the palaestra is its own quiet craft. If you stretch, you leave space around you. If you play a trigon, you choose a corner where the ball will not begin a politics of ricochet. The trainer will offer halteries, and you will take them or refuse them with a palm and a small smile. He has learned not to persuade zeal into someone else's shoulders. When you oil, you stand out of the doorway. When you scrape, you do not let the strigil's curve catch the light into someone else's eyes. If a drop of oil finds the floor, a breath of sand follows it. Slips here are rare not because men are careful by nature, but because the bath has patiently taught them to be so. Heat and water dislike hurry. The third lesson is to arrange your body so that other people can forget it is there. The unctor, oiler, small master of this corner, teaches you the order of touch. Oil first, but not a flood. A thin gloss that lets dust leave without turning the floor into surprise. The strigil moves with a pressure that is confident and never hungry. Down the arm, along the shoulder, across the back, leg to knee to shin, each stroke a line that ends with a small curl of strigmentum wiped to a cloth. There is no soap here. The culture does not require it. The smell is not perfume, only clean, and the skin feels like a decision has been made. You hand back the tool edge first across your palm, the way you might return a knife at a table, manners woven into the direction of metal as much as into the words that travel with it. A coin for the unctor is not demanded, it is rarely refused. Favors live a long time in these rooms. The warm room, the tepidarium, begins without drama. You enter as if you have been expected. Here the etiquette becomes smaller and more particular. Benches are shared as if each body were another kind of heat source. No one sprawls. No one perches on the edge as if preparing to flee. You do not bring the cool draft with you by leaving a curtain gaping. You do not shiver theatrically to borrow attention from the wall paintings. If you feel faint, you say so, and an attendant will show you a seat nearer the door where the air carries less enthusiasm. Sandals stay on. The floor has been taught by fire and will teach your soles in return if you forget. Conversation becomes a murmur that belongs more to the room than to the mouths that made it. You discover that even breathing has customs. In through the nose, out more slowly than you took it in, the way steam likes to be told a story. Between rooms you learn the small choreography of towels and thresholds. Linen is wrung, not flapped. Doorways are not places to stop and think about life, while other bodies work out which way to pass. In the caldarium, a labrum, one cold basin, waits for a palm to bring its water to the forehead, to the chest, to the nape. In that order, no splashing beyond what wakes, nothing that pretends to be a river. The dry heat chamber, the laconicum, asks for even fewer gestures, a posture that says you intend to stay, silence that lets the cedar smell be heard. sandals tucked neatly under the bench so no one else trips over your presence. When you leave the air the way you found it, warm and unruffled, as if you had been a guest in a friend's courtyard rather than a master of your own intentions. And everywhere, the city's quiet machinery continues at a distance you can feel through the salls. Aqueduct water settling in cisterns before it enters, attendants skimming with a bronze dish where a surface asks for attention, drains leaning toward the sewer with a fall that was calculated when your grandfather's grandfather's name was new. Ediles make their rounds when they please. A steward counts oil jars in a whisper. Firewood is measured where you cannot see it. You are free to do almost nothing because someone else is doing almost everything. That is the last of the first lessons. The baths succeed when you submit, lightly and willingly, to an order older than your errands. If you can do that, the house will hold you. If you cannot, it will still hold you. Only you will not notice the gift you are being given. The changing hall receives you like a quiet harbor. Long, bright, and orderly, the apodyterium settles motion into shape with benches worn smooth by 1,000 afternoons, walls in calm reds and yellows, and high windows glazed with thin mica that soften daylight until it speaks in a whisper. Tesserae underfoot make the feet feel steady. The air is warm enough to keep the body from bracing, not yet the kind of warmth that alters the breath. Pegs and niches line one wall like an alphabet of empty promises about to be kept. You sit, and the bench does what good furniture does. It agrees with your bones without asking questions. A cloak folds into itself. Sandals come off and find their place heel to wall, toes outward. A small ampulla of oil and a strigil rest on your bundle with their edges turned harmlessly away. Even before a word is spoken, the room teaches the first lesson. Comfort here is made of small certainties arranged in the right order. The man who tends these certainties is the capsarius, keeper of cloaks and small assurances. He does not sell trust, he organizes it. 2 fingers mark a peg for your belt, a niche for your bundle, a shelf for the flask. The gesture so practiced it reads as hospitality rather than instruction. His eyes move without staring. They notice the ring you forget you are wearing, the purse you think is hidden, the way a careless strap might invite curiosity. Theft is not unknown, though the warnings are architectural rather than loud. Niches whose wooden tongues slip into place, cords that loop and tell on any hand that is not its owner, a painted frieze of eyes that began as a joke and matured into a reminder. In other cities, men scratched little curses onto lead and fed them to drains when a pin or clasp disappeared. Here the simpler cure is to let the capsarius learn your face as you learn his. A nod now will save a story later. You keep what custom approves, a towel, the strigil, the flask, perhaps a coin folded in cloth for a favor, and everything else becomes stillness on a shelf that has an audience. Sound in this room is busy without hurry. A buckle clicks. Linen sighs as it folds. 2 friends trade a sentence that could be about weather or the races and does not need to be either. Words here are tools for moving time forward without disturbing it. A boy's broom fishes gently under benches, bringing out the day's small drift. On a peg near the arch that leads to the palaestra, spare strigils hang with the calm of instruments waiting for a careful hand. A shelf offers modest scents. Myrtle for people who prefer quiet. Marjoram for those who wish to carry a little warmth with them. Nothing at all for those who think the bath's own smell is proper. The body begins, without instruction, to trust the order of things. Oil belongs to skin before water does. Scrape belongs to oil before heat does. Warm bench comes before hot pool. The mosaic panel on the far wall confirms it without making a speech. A boy pours oil. An athlete offers an arm. The bronze curve gathers what the day left. Nobody hurries. Nobody pretends to suffer more than heat requires. Etiquette is simply the habit of being easy for others to share space with. You wrap your bundle so straps do not wander. You return the strigil edge first across your palm. the way one returns a table knife, because direction is part of manners. You do not set oil where feet will learn it the hard way. You move through doorways as if thresholds belong to everyone. The capsarius adds a square of linen you did not think to ask for, and is always right in such things. He touches the peg above your niche with 2 fingers and counts the space and the person together, a kind of inventory that sounds like care. The little token from the gate, the tessera stamped with the bath's mark. He weighs briefly and returns, not because he doubts the doorkeeper, but because the house prefers responsibility to remain visible while it is shared. If you have questions, this is where they belong. How does the laconicum feel today? Dry as a judge or soft as a story? Was the prefernium fed on time? Has someone already sanded the step to the frigidarium where a careless drop of oil likes to teach physics? The answers are soft and sure. The furnace is attentive. The dry room is honest. The sand is down. You are not given news so much as assurance that the house remembers itself. You stand, lighter by a cloak and a day you did not realize you were still carrying, and the room releases you without ceremony. The palaestra breathes through its arch with air that is greener by a degree, plants in pots pretending they are courtyards. The tepidarium answers from behind a curtain that holds its light the way a palm holds a smile. Your sandals know the floor. Your shoulders know the range they will be asked to travel. Your skin knows it will accept oil and then heat in that order. At the threshold you tap the bundle with 2 fingers, a superstition mild as a blessing, and cross into the next pace the building prefers. Behind you, the capsarius glides to adjust a cloth, rescue a fallen scraper, and check a peg, not as an owner of things, but as the memory of where everything goes. If someone demanded to be shown the important features of the Roman bath, he might point to the pegs, the niches, the bench, and the door. He would be right. The important things are the simple things arranged, so they cannot fail. The court opens like a quiet square inside the baths, a rectangle of light ringed by cool porticos. Columns carry a strip of shade that moves with the sun like a slow clock, and the floor underfoot is firm-packed sand that takes a footprint and then forgets it. A small fountain keeps its patient thread of water in one corner. A sundial on the wall minds the hour without hurrying anyone. The air is easier here than in the street. Cleaner, a touch greener from potted laurels, and sound behaves itself, softened by sand and stone. Men come and go in a rhythm that feels learned rather than forced. A short walk, a stretch, a breath counted to 4, then to 4 again. Nothing here is about triumph. The court is a warm-up written in architecture. You begin with movement so modest it could be mistaken for standing well. The shoulders ask for a slow circle, the arms lengthen as if measuring the shade between 2 columns, the neck leans as if listening to the fountain. A trainer, Magister Palaestri, offers a pair of halteres, small stone or metal weights, and shows the range with his own hands. Elbow close, lift not high but smooth, lower on the count that takes longer than the lift. The point is not to spend yourself. The point is to teach the blood a calmer idea of effort before the warm rooms ask for quiet endurance. Near the colonnade, 3 men play trigon, passing a small leather ball in a triangle. Each catch a soft thud against the palm. Each throw an arc that thinks before it arrives. The trainer's eyes keep a neat map of the court, so throws do not trespass on stretches, so stretches do not back into footsteps. If you only walk the perimeter twice and breathe until your ribs remember they can widen without complaint, no one thinks you have done too little. The court is a gate, not a contest. Etiquette here is the craft of sharing space without speaking about sharing space. You choose a patch of sand without centrality. You face the portico rather than the people. You let a length of air exist between your arm and your neighbor's ear. When the uncus, a hook, on the wall offers a cord for gentle pulls, you step so the line does not cross a walkway. If a drop of oil escapes from someone's flask and finds the floor, a breath of sand follows it from a nearby jar. Slips are prevented by habit. not by warnings. Conversation keeps to the edge of hearing and belongs to the court rather than to any one mouth. Old men stroll the shaded side like slow water, auditing the form of younger backs with eyes that have seen 1,000 afternoons. Boys with brooms move as if they were fishing for fallen leaves and small stones. Sandals stay on. The floor will belong to fire soon enough. The court trains the souls to expect temperature as part of the story, not as a surprise. After a few minutes, the body signals that it has remembered how to be a body. Sweat gathers not as a protest, but as a confirmation. The scent in the air adjusts. Less street, more skin warmed honestly. This is the moment the unctor chooses to call you to the little bench just inside the arch, where oil and tools keep a tidy company. He warms a thread of olive oil in his palm. It carries a faint myrtle or rosemary if the bath has been generous today, or only itself if the bath prefers to be neutral. Oil first, in a thin gloss, along the forearm, across the shoulder, down the back and thigh. Then the strigil, a curved bronze scraper, travels each path with even pressure, gathering dust and sweat into a small curl the Romans call strigmentum. It does not cut. It persuades. Wiped to a linen, it leaves behind skin that does not remember the street. There is no foam here, no lather drama. The bath's grammar is oil and scrape, not soap. The unctor turns the tool and returns it edge first across your palm, the way a polite table returns a knife. If a coin changes hands, it does so with the same modesty as the first token at the gate. The court resets around you as if it were a stage between scenes. A boy rakes light lines in the sand to erase the map of other people's feet. The halteries return to their shelf without clatter. The trigon players move their triangle a few paces so a pair of friends can take a quiet lap under the far portico. On the wall, the sundial's shadow lengthens. In the basin, the fountain keeps its narrow silver unchanged. Your breath has slowed by itself. The pulse in the neck has stopped trying to edit the world. Somewhere beyond a door, fire is being reminded to behave. In the floor of a room you have not entered, yet is learning your name through heat. You drink 2 careful handfuls of water at the margin, cool, not cold, so the warm rooms will not meet a shock, and the body answers with a steadiness that means you have chosen the right pace. Now the court has done its work, and its last courtesy is to send you on without insisting on a farewell. The curtain to the tepidarium hangs straight and patient. A draft you cannot see makes it move a finger's width and no more. You cross the threshold with sandals that understand the next floor will be warmer, with shoulders that are no longer surprised by their own range, with skin that has agreed to be oiled and scraped and therefore ready to be warmed. Behind you, the magister is already teaching a new set of shoulders how to lift without argument, and the court returns to its natural music, a soft catch, a measured footfall, a broom's dry whisper, a fountain's unchanging thread. If a stranger asked why someone might not last a day in a Roman bathhouse, you could point to this room and say that failure begins in not recognizing a gate when one is given. The bath is sequence. The sequence begins here. The bench waits just inside the arch, a small island between courtyard wind and the steady hush of the warm rooms. The unctor warms his hands first, rubbing palm to palm until the skin speaks a quiet heat of its own. He tips a thin thread of olive oil from a narrow-necked flask, plain oil for most, a breath of myrtle or rosemary for those who like a ghost of scent, and lets it find your forearm, your shoulder, your back. It is not poured like a feast. It is drawn like a line. The oil does not shout. It learns your skin quickly and teaches dust how to leave without taking any part of you it did not bring. The first gloss looks like nothing much, yet it changes the surface from story into sentence. Everything that follows will read more easily. He spreads with the heel of his hand, never the fingertips. The heel delivers warmth without tickling. The heel keeps the gesture from suggesting too much. Along the ribs, a slow arc. Across the shoulder blade, a path that has been walked by 1,000 men and now remembers you. Down the thigh, over the knee, around the calf to the ankle where sandals hold their little treaty with heat. The tool is a curve of metal called the strigil, bronze most days, iron now and then, its edge blunt as good manners. The youngster shows it to you as a friend would show a knife at table, edge facing his own wrist, handle toward your palm, then keeps it, because today the work is his. He sets the curve to your oiled arm and draws it in one even stroke toward the towel on his lap. There is no scrape of harm. There is the soft, almost musical whisper of oil and fine dust, and the day's salt giving up their brief claim on you. The Romans call that coil of gathered residue strigmentum. It is not thrown. It is folded away. Some houses sell it to apothecaries who believe there is medicine in what clean skin leaves behind. Some houses feed it to the trash fire and think no more of it. Here the unctor wipes and folds, wipes and folds. The way a scribe turns a page with care, he does not need to explain. He works the shoulder where labor stored its small argument. He follows the long muscle of the back in strokes that begin and end at the same invisible landmark. He asks the knee to admit it is a hinge rather than a knot. Between passes, he adds only enough oil to keep the tool honest. The point is not to shine. The point is to release. There is etiquette even in this small procedure. You stand with a foot on the low block so the hamstrings behave. You offer the arm he is ready for, not the one you think dearer to you. You keep the towel where he can find it without looking. If you speak in the grammar of this room. Few words, slow words, the kind that do not scatter concentration. If a drop finds the floor, a pinch of sand follows it from the jar under the bench. Slickness in a bath is not an accident. It is a failure to remember the community under your feet. You return the strigil if he lends it, edge first across your palm, not because the metal is dangerous, but because the gesture is a language older than you are. When he is done with one side, he rests the tool for a breath and lets the skin decide whether it would like another pass. Very often it does. The second pass is not more pressure, it is more evenness. What leaves you then is not dirt, it is insistence. You feel taller by a finger's width and quieter by a paragraph. Soap would make a scene here and is not invited. The culture is oil and scrape, not lather and applause. Olive oil persuades what must go to go. Heat will do the rest. Water will finish the sentence. Linen will close the book. The ampulla, your flask, returns to the shelf with only a thin line missing from its neck. The skin reads as clean without being stripped into complaint. In a city that knows dust as a fact and perfume as a desire, this is the arrangement that offends neither. You understand, in the body rather than in the mouth, why the tepidarium cannot do its best work on a surface still loyal to the street. You understand why men here do not smell like soap, but like nothing, which is the most civilized smell a crowd can manage. The unctor wipes the strigil dry, turns it in his hand as if reading yesterday in the metal's small scratches, and sets it on the row with its brothers. He offers you a square of linen. It is not for drying off yet, only for the mind that prefers to hold a little cloth while it walks toward heat. He nods toward the door that leads to warmth deeper than this bench can supply. You stand and feel how the oil has become not a film but a decision. How the scrape has removed not merely what clung, but also the day's habit of thinking in short, hurried lines. Your sandals remember the promise they made to your soles. Your breath remembers the count to 4 and then to 4 again. Behind you the bench looks as it looked before you came. Quiet wood, clean towel, a small jar of sand with its surface smooth as the start of a story, because the work of the baths is to take what is offered, to keep what is needed, and to leave no complaint behind. Ahead, the tepidarium waits to declare that the body has been made ready in the correct order, that warmth will now be a companion rather than a struggle, and that a stranger who does not last a day here has not failed. He has only not yet agreed to be helped by very old, very patient hands. The warm room greets you without a headline. You part a heavy curtain and step into air that has forgotten edges. Heat folded into itself, gentle enough to ask nothing, steady enough to answer everything. The tepidarium is oval in some baths, square in others, but it always feels rounded, as if corners had been persuaded to relax. Benches run the walls in a low ring. The stone has a softness that is not softness, only temperature doing a kindness to hardness. Light arrives from high, small windows that tame the sky into a pale wash. It glances off damp plaster, touches a mosaic border, and disappears before it can think about glare. You sit where the curve invites you, sandals still on, towel draped like a quiet thought across the lap, and the first lesson is immediate. Warmth has a grammar, and this is the first clear sentence. Beneath your soul's a technology you cannot see keeps its promises. The floor is not a floor, it is a suspensura, a tile bridge held up by small pillars called pili. Between those little columns, heat from the pre-fernium walks with slow dignity from wall to wall. In some houses, hollow clay flues, tubuli, climb inside the walls, lifting warm air behind the plaster until the whole room is a kind of patient lung. An attendant passes with a bronze ladle and a pail, sprinkling measured drops on the floor to call up a coil of steam where the tiles think a little too loudly about dryness. Another man opens a small vent at the far corner, a valve you would not notice if you were not watching for it, and the room breathes once, quietly, to keep the balance of wet and warm. You feel none of this as mechanics. You feel it as absence of effort. Warmth arrives and does not argue. The body agrees. Here the pace resets to something a stranger might mistake for stillness. You lean back against a wall that thinks kindly of your shoulder blades. Your neck finds an angle it forgot last week. The skin that accepted oil and scraper decides that pores are doors and that doors can be open without making a scene. You draw breath in through the nose and let it out more slowly than it came, because that is how the room seems to want it. Across the way, a man presses the back of his wrist to the inner elbow as if reading a pulse in a language only he knows. Beside him, an older visitor rests his palms on his thighs and measures the length of a thought to the count of 8. Voices, when they happen, are a layer of sound on which the ear can lie down. Two friends deciding without deciding whether to try the caldarium first today or the laconicum. Someone asking the attendant if the labrum has been filled anew. A remark about the chariots so flatly offered that it cannot disturb a single tile. Etiquette here becomes almost invisible because it is almost the same as comfort. You keep to your stretch of bench and do not turn it into a dais. You do not drag linen across another person's warmth. If you rise, you gather your towel first, then your feet, then your breath, in that order, so the room does not feel abandoned by pieces. When you return from a splash at the doorway basin, forehead, chest, nape, your steps remember that oil and heat, together, are generous to balance if you let them be. Attendants replace a cool towel with one that has learned some heat from a rack near the wall. They do it with a glance that asks permission and returns to neutral in the same second. No one hurries. Even time has to stand in line here, and no one minds. Between the warm benches and the hotter door, a small theater of detail plays for anyone who enjoys such things. A border of mosaic, little leaves, and a single dolphin that looks like it has kept a secret for 100 years, runs just above the floor, its tesserae made brighter by the tiniest film of moisture that never turns to drip. A niche holds a shallow dish of pumice for hands that like the feel of caution before heat. On a low stool sits a copper basin with a lip bent just so, the curve perfect for pouring a thread of water onto a shoulder without splash. The wall plaster carries the faint breath of cedar, not from scent, but because cedar slats behind the flues learned to lend their thought to the air long ago. The room is not decorated so much as finished, the way a sentence is finished by choosing the right period and placing it once. After a while the warm becomes warmer, not because the furnace has changed its mind, but because your body has admitted that it can stop defending itself. The pulse under the jaw slows. A knot you had named shoulder loses interest in being a person and returns to being a muscle. You understand why the Romans make this the middle of the sequence, why they will not allow you to jump from oil to cold or from street to scald. The tepidarium is the hinge. It persuades rather than insists. From here you may go a step deeper, through one door to the caldarium, where the alveus, the hot pool, waits, and the labrum, the cold basin, sits like a silver answer on a marble pedestal, or through another to the laconicum, the dry room where heat is a blanket and breath is a quiet instrument. Your sandals remind your soles they are friends. Your towel remembers you will want it on the return. Your skin remembers that olive oil is not a costume, but a compact with warmth. You sit 1 minute more than you meant to, then 2, and the room allows it. When you finally rise, it is the tepidarium that has decided, not you. It has finished its work and will not be improved by pleading. You move toward the hotter curtain with the feeling that nothing, from the furnace fire to the smallest window hinge, wants a performance from you. All it wants is your willingness to be moved along by a sequence that has worked for centuries. If some visitors do not last a day in a Roman bathhouse, it is not this room that beats them. It is their habit of negotiating with what does not negotiate. Here the rule is kind and ancient. Be warmed before you are heated. Be persuaded before you are asked. Be quiet before you are impressed. The door lifts a corner of its cloth to let you through, and the air on the other side writes its own sentence across your skin. The curtain to the caldarium parts, and you enter a room that seems to be made of breath made visible. Heat lives in the stone itself. It climbs through the hypocaust under the floor, rises inside hollow wall flues, and gathers beneath a curved ceiling where a wet shine softens every edge. The first step tells the soles a truth. Sandals were not a suggestion. The floor is a warm tide. Between raised pili it hums with a distant furnace's patience. Light is small and golden from high windows. A drop slides down plaster, stops, and becomes a bead that mirrors the room until it gives up and falls. Benches line the walls at different heights, so you can choose your season. Lower for merely hot, higher for a kind of summer that begins to edit the inside of your bones. The air carries the scent of warmed oil, wet marble, and a cedar note that wandered in through the wall flues and decided to stay. You sit without drama, towel folded under you like a thoughtful boundary, and let the room write its first sentence across your shoulders. There is no roar here, only the steady hush of heat doing arithmetic with moisture. At one end a shallow hot pool, the alveus, lies so still that the lamps along the rim look like coins dropped onto its surface and suspended there. Steam blurs the line where water meets stone. When someone eases in, the disturbance travels the way a memory travels, outward, then gone. An attendant moves along the edge with a bronze ladle and a bucket, teaching the temperature small lessons. A measured pour raises a thread of steam. A pause lets the air think about what it wants to be. Near the door stands the labrum, a wide cold basin on a pedestal, polished so diligently it seems to have learned how to glow. Etiquette here is an old road. You do not plunge at once. You warm until the breath slides without protest, and the skin admits it is a gate, not a wall. You touch a palm to the labrum and anoint forehead, chest, nape, 3 deliberate points. So the body is reminded that contrast can be a friend if introduced with courtesy. Only then do you let the alveus have you. Inch by inch, heat closing around the knees, the hips, the ribs, until buoyancy takes a small vote on your behalf and decides you may float a little without leaving the world. Time in the caldarium is counted by the body rather than by clocks. The pulse under the jaw becomes a metronome that refuses haste. A few breaths arrive sharp and then learn to lengthen. The chest discovers that exhale is a kind of permission. Conversation reduces to syllables that would not trouble a curtain, An attendant's footfall is the loudest thing in the room, and it, too, is quiet. You learn not to chase relief, you let it arrive. When sweat gathers, the strigil returns to its craft. 1 or 2 light passes, no zeal, no bragging, and the towel receives what leaves as if it had been expecting a guest by that name. Heat reveals a habit you did not know your thoughts had. The habit of tapping at the inside of your skull for attention. Here that habit has nowhere to be loud, so it tires and lies down. You are not melting, you are being edited. If a stranger fails in this room, it is usually because he insists on proving something to the heat. The heat does not accept proof, it accepts patience. When the body says enough, it says it softly. You stand as if lifting the day off a shelf. The labrum becomes a bright idea again. A palm of cold to the brow writes clarity without insult. A pour along the back is a sentence that ends with relief rather than drama. You step to the doorway where the air is a degree less committed, and there, if the house has one, the path bends to the laconicum, the dry chamber. If the caldarium is steam spoken in prose, the laconicum is heat written as a poem with fewer words. The room is round or nearly so, with a domed ceiling and sometimes an oculus. A deliberate eye where a column of cooler air falls like a slow bell. Benches here are higher, drier. The walls feel as if they have been ironed. The breath is different. No shimmer of vapor. Only a clean weight that wants to rest on the chest and be lifted away in measured phrases. Some visitors wear a felt cap to keep the head from learning the lesson too quickly. Others fold a towel into a patient crown. Sandals tuck under the bench. Posture becomes the instrument on which heat is played. Dry heat asks less of the skin and more of the manners of mind. You do nothing, but you do it carefully. Shoulders loosen not forward, but down. The jaw decides it does not need to be a guard. The eyes opt for the simple work of being closed. If the caldarium persuaded pores to open, the laconicum persuades thoughts to stop knocking. Silence acquires a texture you could lean your back against. In some houses, an attendant opens a small vent near the floor, and you can feel the room sip once and then become itself again. A bronze bowl on a tripod at the center sometimes holds a little water for splashing on the floor, not to make steam, only to remind dust that someone still remembers it. You might measure 5 long breaths, then 5 more, and never once think of numbers. If dizziness ever arrives, and it rarely does in a house that keeps its fires like accounts, you say so, and someone guides you to the shadow near the door where the air carries a hint of mercy. There is no contest here. The room does not want to be won. It wants to be understood. The way back is a descent written in comforts. From dry to warm again. A moment in the tepidarium to let the edges return. A last mindful rinse from the labrum for forehead, chest, and nape. Perhaps a final minute on the lowest bench of the caldarium if the skin asks for a closing sentence. Then a towel that has been waiting near a rack learns your shoulders. The sandals remember why they matter. The door curtain lifts its corner like an old friend holding a gate. Behind you, the caldarium continues its arithmetic with steam. The laconicum keeps its poem to itself. Ahead, the cooler rooms gather you the way evening gathers light. Not all at once, but enough. If someone once said you would not last a day in a Roman bathhouse, they were not accusing your strength. They were predicting your argument with sequence. Here, the sequence is the teacher. Warm before hot, wet before dry, cold not as a dare, but as a punctuation mark. You learn the line, you speak it in your bones, and the house, pleased, lets you pass. If the caldarium is the face that smiles, the prefernium is the patient jaw that does the chewing. You come to a low corridor at the back of the complex where the air changes shape. Warmth becomes work, and the smell of clean smoke speaks in a quieter grammar. A doorway sits lower than a man's chest so heat cannot flee. Beside it, baskets of split wood wait in ranks. Olive where pruning was generous, pine where resin answers quickly, oak for a steady heart. The mouth of the furnace is a black oval rimmed with brick baked hard by years of conversation with flame. An attendant fits an iron peel under the embers as a baker would, nudges the glow into a neat bank, then feeds the fire not with drama but with timing. 3 sticks to answer the hour, 1 to hold its hand, a pause to let the draft decide it agrees. What you hear is not a roar but a hush that knows arithmetic. The floor you sat on earlier is not solid ground at all. It is a suspensura, a bridge of tiles on hundreds of small pillars called pili. Between those pillars the hot breath travels, pushed from the prefernium, drawn by narrow paths the builders designed when the paint on the walls was young. Hollow flues, tubuli, climb inside the plaster like quiet chimneys so the heat can comb the walls as well. Somewhere a small vent is opened with a brick moved and set again. Somewhere a gap is pinched narrower by a bit of wetted cloth stuffed into a crack. The attendants are not sorcerers. They are accountants of warmth, keeping ledgers in their heads. How much wood for a crowded afternoon? Which bench runs hot first? How fast the room breathes on a humid day? They do not boast about this because a good balance has no speech to spare. Ash has its own routine. A man kneels on a padded board and rakes the gray bed forward until the glowing heart shows clean and red. Another catches the ash in a shallow pan and carries it to a pit where it will be sifted for anything still willing to burn. The tool handles are wrapped in leather so a hand can linger without blister. A bucket of water waits at a careful distance in case sparks grow curious. This room is all patience and angle. The floor slopes a finger's width where sweepings must go. The door lintel keeps its eyebrows low. A little stack of tegulae, spare flat tiles, leans against the wall because the heat writes its own edits in clay over years, and the bath likes to be ready with a fresh sentence when one is needed. Even silence here is measured. No one bangs. No one scrapes metal on brick unless the task demands a reminder that instruments exist. You can see, if the attendant trusts you to understand, how the builders thought about water as carefully as they thought about fire. A settling tank upstream slows the aqueduct's gift so sand can fall and clarity can rise. A lead fistula, lined where it matters, carries the calmer flow into cisterns that pour by gravity into basins and pools. Where hot water is required, the furnace shoulder holds a broad bronze kettle whose belly borrows heat from the same flame that warms the floors. A boy lifts a lid with a cloth and lets out a sigh of steam that escapes like a well-behaved ghost. Overflow lips are cut into marble so the water leaves as a sheet rather than a quarrel of drops. Drains lean toward the sewer with a fall calculated once and then proved by a century of good behavior. No one praises any of this aloud. When a system works, Romans consider it a citizen with good manners, present, useful, unremarkable. Maintenance is a slow festival of small tools. Once a week, or as often as heat writes soot in the wrong places, a man threads a bundle of green twigs. Laurel if someone was generous, willow if not, through the wall openings and scours the tubuli until the brush comes out darker than it went in. A cracked pillar under the floor is replaced by sliding in wedges of brick on a sled of planks while the fire is banked low. A choreography learned from elders who learned it from elders in turn. Where plaster peels, a lime wash repairs the wall in quiet coats. Where a mosaic lifts a tessera to complain, a dish of warm wax persuades it to sit again until a proper fix can be made in evening cool. The aedile who inspects public places sometimes arrives without announcement. The staff do not straighten in alarm because they have kept the place in a state that needs no sudden improvements. The law is written, but the habit is older and kinder. Make the work invisible to the bather, and the bather will remember only ease. Standing near the furnace, you begin to understand why a stranger might not last a day here. Not because the heat is cruel, but because the order is exact. Fire must be fed as if it were a guest with preferences, not a beast to be conquered. Air must be taught which path to choose and which to forget. Water must be invited early and shown where to leave without complaint. Sandals, towels, benches, basins, every simple thing depends on this hidden arithmetic of fuel and flow. The attendants do not announce their victories because in a house like this, no one wins. The house continues, and continuation is the only triumph worth having. When you turn back toward the warm rooms, the corridor seems cooler by a degree you can feel in the wrists. The prefurnium settles behind you with a contented exhale. The hypocaust resumes its silent work of carrying the day like a careful tray. You will sit again on a bench that does not burn, step on a floor that does not shock, touch water that keeps its promise, and you will believe, as you are meant to, that such comfort is ordinary. It is not. It is the result of men feeding fire by a clock that does not forgive, of bricks placed with a patience that outlives names, of vents nudged and ash sifted and flues brushed until they remember they are hollow. The baths teach you relaxation in public. The furnace teaches you gratitude in private. And the sequence, still kind, carries you forward to the frigidarium, where the city will return your edges, and to evening, where the day will finally admit it is done. The frigidarium is brightness after gold, marble under a high, cool ceiling, light falling from small windows as if sifted through frost. Voices turn to echoes here. Even sandals sound careful. In the center, a wide pool holds water the aqueduct has kept honest. Its surface a pale sheet that looks colder than it is, and is, nevertheless, cold enough. Niches hold dry statues that never learn to shiver. A bronze lip spills a thin thread into the pool and writes a steady ring on the surface that never becomes a ripple large enough to trouble anyone. You do not rush. A palm touches the water first. The shock meets the wrist, then the forearm, and you breathe out once so the body has space for what follows. Etiquette is quiet and exact. Step down by the shallow stair, shoulders lowered, jaw loose, eyes soft. The chill erases heat in a clean line up the legs, across the belly, along the back. Goose flesh arrives like a flock deciding it wants to lift. You count 4 slow breaths, then 4 again, and discover that the air has edges here while thoughts do not. The heart makes itself known and then calms because you ask it to, and because rooms like this have trained 1,000 hearts to do the same. You rise when you feel clear, not brave. A hand passes cool water from the pedestal basin, the labrum, to forehead, chest, and nape. It reads as punctuation rather than a dare. Linen finds the shoulders. Sandals find the step. The skin speaks in 2 languages at once, warm in the core, cool on the surface. No one splashes. Movement is neat. An attendant smooths a wet footprint with a stroke of cloth, as if erasing a small rumor. You sit a brief minute on the bench near the door where air is kinder, and the breath lengthens by itself. The sequence holds. A short return to the tepidarium to gather the warmth back without argument. Then out toward ordinary light and the softer errands of evening. Barber and cup, a word with a friend, the street remembering your name. One more room remains for today, and it is not a room of water at all, but of company. The bath has finished teaching your body. Now it will let the city speak in a low voice while you dress and settle the day. You return by the warm room for a breath of ordinary heat, then drift toward the little quarter where the bathhouse becomes a village. Benches sit under a painted frieze. A shelf holds mirrors of polished bronze. A copper kettle steams politely on a brazier that never hurries. This is the territory of the tonsure, the barber, who keeps order in hair and beards the way the furnace keeper keeps order in flame. He greets without ceremony, wraps a warm cloth across jaw and neck, and tests the grain with the back of his fingers. A thin film of oil follows his touch. The razor, honed on leather and passed across a stone that remembers 1,000 mornings, glides with the confidence of a habit older than names. Where stubble resists, he coaxes with a whisper of pumice rather than force. Tweezers tidy the brows. A small thread teases a stray at the cheek. A second cloth, cooler, confirms the work and closes the skin as gently as a door meant to be opened again. You learn, without being told, that the Romans prefer finished over fussed. It is the difference between neatness and display, and the baths have always been partisan for the first. On a narrow counter stand small glass unguentaria, each sealed with a thought. Myrtle that speaks in a low voice. Rosemary that remembers sun but does not bring it inside. Nard that could dominate a street if allowed, but here is measured to a single drop set at the wrist and pressed once to the collar. There is etiquette in scent the way there is etiquette in heat. You do not perfume the room. You invite the room to meet you halfway. The barber's palm is quick at refusing zeal. One dab, never two. If you must gild, gild with restraint. He offers a pinch of powder for the neck, a brush across the shoulder to dismiss what clung to the cloth, a mirror to confirm that you still look like yourself, only calmer. Coins travel the counter with the same modesty as they did at the gate. Beyond, the wall opens to a small papina window where food behaves as sensibly as the rest of the building. Bread that breaks with a soft sigh. Olives that have learned patience in their brine. Cheese the color of early straw. A dish of lupin beans that invites you to peel and pass. Peel and pass. The rhythm becoming a kind of conversation even if no one speaks. A fig that remembers late summer without boasting. For drink, there is water. Of course, always water. And a cup of mulsum. Wine touched with honey so lightly it reads as a kindness rather than a trick. Or pasca. The vinegar and water mix soldiers taught cities to respect on hot days. You eat leaning on the threshold where cool air from outside negotiates with the warm air within. Crumbs fall exactly where the boy with the broom expects them to be, and he arrives when you would have thought to wish for him. Appetite here is domestic, not theatrical. The bath prefers that you leave feeling capable of errands rather than conqueror of a table. The talk you overhear is the city's low weather. Grain ships sighted at Ostia, and how that will treat the price of bread. A repair on an aqueduct arch that held for 50 years and will now be taught to hold for 50 more. A charioteer who took a foolish line in the turn and learned a new respect for the color green. A teacher worried about a boy who reads too fast, and a father who is pleased about the same thing. A patron placing a hand on a client's arm and promising to be seen standing beside him tomorrow, which is a quieter coin that spins better than most. Politics does not enter the bath to argue. It walks through in sandals and learns, for an hour, that events can be spoken of as if they were not hungry. If you add a word, you add it like salt. If you carry silence, you have chosen the house style. When you decide the day has been made level, you fold yourself back toward the apodyterium. The capsarius has already noticed your return. He taps the peg above your niche with 2 fingers, counts bundle and person together, and places your things where your hands will find them without searching. The tessera that entered with you returns to the doorkeeper's bowl with a soft click that sounds exactly like closure. Cloth meets skin that has forgotten argument. Sandals accept the lesson of warm floors and prepare to forget it on cool stone outside. If you owe a coin to the oiler, you find his eye and make the small exchange that says gratitude is part of the routine. The barber gives a brief nod that means your face now belongs to the evening. On the far side of a half door, an edile inspects a drain and says nothing because there is nothing to say. The baths prefer approval that does not need words. Closing gathers itself without haste. Lamps are trimmed so their light is warm enough for sweeping and not bright enough to wake a tile. An attendant lifts a bucket and walks a last path along the caldarium's edge. The labrum in the cold room is emptied and wiped so the day does not remain on its lip. The furnace is fed a final measured armful, then banked so the hypocaust will remember warmth at dawn without startling anyone into labor. A brush threaded with green twigs disappears into a wall flue and returns shaded with soot. Another will follow tomorrow and the next day after that because the building's lungs, like yours, prefer regular care to heroic cures. A tray collects the small curls of strigmentum from the unctor's towel and carries them away to the fire that does not brag even when it consumes what the day left behind. You step back into the evening, and the city receives you as one of its ordinary successes. The street is cooler, the air thin with cooking smoke, the sky a slate learning how to be night. Your body is clean in a language that does not announce itself. You walk differently, not because the baths changed your shape, but because they changed your schedule. If anyone ever said you would not last a day in a Roman bathhouse, they meant that it is difficult to agree, hour after hour, to an order that refuses drama and insists on sequence. Warm before hot, dry after wet. Work where you cannot be seen so that calm can be seen everywhere. You lasted because you learned the grammar and let the rooms do the talking. The door closes behind you with a touch that is not quite a sound. Tomorrow's fire is already imagined. Tonight, you go home carrying only what the bath meant you to carry: a body at ease, a mind that has misplaced its hurry, and the gentle knowledge that discipline, when it is kindly kept, feels exactly like rest. The lamps are lowered, the last bucket has made its quiet circle along the pool's edge, and the furnace is banked so the floor will remember warmth in the morning without asking anyone to hurry. Doors are drawn in, cloth on cloth, wood on wood, until the building holds its breath. Outside, evening is a thin blue. The street measures itself in soft footsteps and cooking smoke. Inside you, the order of the day has finished its sentence: warm before hot, cool after warm, and the body understands what it means to be done. If you are listening in bed, let the jaw unhook and rest. Let the tongue sleep where the roof of the mouth begins. Let the shoulders lower by the smallest degree you can notice. Draw a slow breath in through the nose and send it out a little longer than it arrived. Imagine the tepidarium's bench under your back, steady and kind. Imagine a palm from the labrum, cool to the forehead, then the chest, then the nape, as if the day were being signed neatly and put away. Thoughts may still move like attendants closing rooms. Let them pass with their small tools and their easy steps. Nothing is owed now. In a moment the screen will darken and the room will become quieter still. An hour of ambient music will follow, the way a bath follows a warm quart, one simple thing after another. Breathe the way the hypocaust breathes, without rush, without grind. If sleep comes, let it come without announcement. If wakefulness lingers, rest inside it like water that has stopped needing to ripple. The city will keep its watch. The baths will open again. For tonight, you are finished. Sleep well.